All right, so we're back with Thomas Taylor. We are on chapter 18, and we will go right into it. We've just finished up on the concept of time. There are a few interesting ideas in there. One, time naturally leads to degradation or destruction. It's the kind of principle of entropy. Another one was maybe I won't remember just now, but there were a couple of good principles in there that I thought would be worth remembering. So we'll go into chapter 18. The next, which is also the last of the most important dogmas contained in the Physics of Aristotle, is the doctrine concerning the perpetuity of natural motion. This, the Stagirite discusses most elaborately and profoundly in the 8th book of that work, demonstrating that the first natural motion is perpetual, and splendidly announcing the perpetuity of the world through perpetuity of motion. In this book, likewise, he suspends the whole of the physical theory from the first philosophy, or metaphysics, and demonstrates that every natural essence is suspended from a supernatural cause. For he proves that every natural body is moved, that everything which is moved by something, and that the primary mover, and which is properly so called, is an immovable essence, possessing an invariable sameness of subsistence. The following is that part of the 8th book of his Physics, which contains a demonstration of the perpetuity of time, to which I have subjoined the commentary of Simplicius. So we started on this last time, yesterday, but I don't think we got very far. I think I was going to skip the footnotes until we got to maybe 6. All right, let's just keep going, though. So Aristotle. Whether, however, was motion once generated, not having a subsistence before, and will it again perish, so that nothing will be moved? Or was it neither generated nor will be corrupted, but always was and always will be? And is this present with things as something immortal and unceasing, being, as it were, a certain life to all things, which have a natural subsistence? That motion, therefore, is, all those assert who say anything concerning nature, because they fabricate the world. And all these speculate concerning generation and corruption, which could not subsist unless motion had a being. Those, too, who assert that there are infinite worlds, and that some of these worlds are generated and others corrupted, these say that motion always is, for it is necessary that the generations and corruptions of them should be accompanied with motion. But such as assert that there is one world, or that there is not always, these admit concerning motion what is conformable to that opinion. Okay, so we already read footnote 6. If, therefore, it be possible that one thing, nothing, or rather, if, therefore, it be possible that once nothing was moved, it is necessary that this must have happened in a twofold respect, for it must be either as Anaxagoras says, viz., that all things subsisting together and being at rest in an infinite time, intellect produced and separated motion, or as Empedocles says, that things were already moved and at rest, being moved indeed when friendship made one from many things, or strife many from one, and at rest in the intervening times. So it sort of sounds like the biblical account with the chaos preceding and then mind bringing order with Anaxagoras, and then Empedocles is sort of like Penrose's cyclical model or something. Big bang, big crunch, big bang, big crunch, I guess. For he says as follows, Empedocles, as far as one from many was produced, or many to the one their being owed, so far these natures generated were, not firm eternity in them abides, but so far as forever they are changed, nor ceasing at once to exist, forever they immovable, alternatively remain. For by the words, so far as they are changed, we must conceive that he means hither and thither. changed local, in terms of local motion, I suppose. And footnote 7. If it be possible that there was a time when nothing was moved, it must necessarily either be so as that motion was not before, as Anaxagoras seems to say, rendering more clear the perpetually consubsistent procession of secondary from primary natures by an apparently temporal evolution. So he's, again, Simplicius is interpreting Anaxagoras platonically, whereas Aristotle is taking Anaxagoras' prosaic description at face value and saying Anaxagoras held there was a beginning of time, there was this mixture and then a beginning. And that's also sort of what Plato seems to say, but Plato's explicit that this is kind of metaphorical. Simplicius expands that metaphorical interpretation to all the Eleatics, Anaxagoras, Empedocles, and everybody. So what Simplicius takes Anaxagoras to be doing is rendering more clear the perpetually consistent procession of secondary from primary natures by an apparently temporal evolution. So the creation narrative is just a metaphor to describe the eternal process of emanation. And there is the same mode of hypothesis, though someone should suppose motion not to exist hereafter, on which account this is not mentioned by Aristotle. Okay, I see. So an alternative not mentioned by Aristotle is that time, there was no motion before, and then there was motion, and then afterwards motion will stop again. That's not mentioned by Aristotle. But Anaxagoras appears to say that all things subsisting together and being at rest in an infinite pastime, intellect, the fabricator of the world, being willing to separate the forms of things, which he calls homeomerae, inserted in them motion, since corporeal separation could not be effected without motion. But the second mode is that of Empedocles, alternatively making motion and rest. For according to him, the intelligible and sensible worlds are composed from the same four elements, viz., the former, intelligible. The former intelligible world is composed of the same four elements, the intelligible paradigmatically, and the latter sensible world iconically, or after the manner of an image. So the four elements, the intelligible version of the four elements, is an interesting idea. I don't know if we've encountered that explicitly before. So, by the way, there's some YouTube comments. Okay. Cool. And we'll keep going. According to him, the intelligible and sensible worlds are composed from the same four elements, viz. The former intelligible paradigmatically, the latter sensible iconically, or after the manner of an image. The producing cause also of the intelligible world is, according to him, friendship, which through union forms it into a sphere, and which also he denominates God. But the producing cause of the sensible world through separation is strife. So that love and strife, Simplicius of Empedocles, Simplicius interprets to be intelligible is the friendship or love, and then the sensible world is the strife at one level. In this world, however, both union and separation may be seen, both of them indeed always, but one of these having dominion over the other in different parts or at different times. For Empedocles says that here also is friendship and strife, but here also friendship and strife alternatively have dominion in men and fishes, in beasts and birds. Okay, so maybe in general, the intelligible predominates with friendship. In general, the sensible predominates with strife of its own nature. But here in the cosmos, both are mixed all the time. one coming to the fore alternatively with the other. But Aristotle, citing those verses of Empedocles in which he conceives him to have delivered motion and immobility, even so, it wasn't just about motion or immobility for Simplicius. Simplicius thinks Empedocles is talking about this friendship and strife and intelligible and sensible, but Aristotle's interpreting that to be about motion and immobility. So Aristotle surveys motion according to generation. Empedocles clearly asserting that the one is produced from the many and the many from the one, and that so far as this is the case, they are generated and do not possess stable eternity, for that motion subsists with generation has been before observed. But Empedocles appears to have surveyed immobility according to the perpetual sameness of the mutation of the one and the many into each other. For this is the meaning of the following lines. But so far as forever they are changed, now cease at once to exist. Forever they, immovable, alternatively remain. So the eternity there is the eternal alteration. For so far as they perpetually change into each other, their mutation and motion are perpetual. But so far as changing hither and thither, sensibles are generated, as for instance one from the many or many from the one, and after the mutation they stop, sometimes so as to be one, and at other times so as to be many. So far as this is the case, always periodically returning after the mutation to the form of the one or the many, according to this period they are immovable, until they again begin to change. Okay, so either the mutation in general back and forth is perpetual and therefore immovable in a sense. The mutation is immutable, you could say. Or you could say, as he points out, that in a cycle, at a certain point, they return to a state of rest and then keep going. So that's another sense of the immobility. We'll go back to Aristotle. For by the words, so far... Actually, let's read the verse again. As far as one from many was produced, or many to the one their being owed, so far these natures generated were, nor firm eternity in them abides. But so far as forever they are changed, nor cease at once to exist, forever they, immovable, alternately remain. Aristotle, for by the words, so far as they are changed... we must conceive that he means hither and thither. So far as they are changed, as in moved, not totally generated or totally corrupted, things move around, but the motion remains perpetual. With respect to these things, therefore, we must consider how they subsist. For to perceive the truth respecting them not only contributes to the contemplation concerning nature, but also to the method which pertains to the first principle. So here we're kind of getting the intersection of physics and metaphysics. Aristotle says, footnote 8, Aristotle here shows how the investigation of the perpetuity of motion is necessary, and in the first place it contributes to the physical theory, for if natural motion is perpetual, whether according to the continued or according to the never-failing mutation, it is evident that natural things also are perpetual, some of them indeed, through remaining the same in number, but others through the corruption of one being the generation of another. In the next place, it contributes to the assent to the first principle, the contemplation of which no longer pertains to physics, but to first philosophy. But it contributes to this assent because it will be shown that perpetual motion subsists from an immovable cause, who is entirely exempt from a natural essence. Aristotle. But we shall first begin from things which have been before defined by us in the physics. We say, therefore, that motion is the perfect energy of that which is movable so far as it is movable. Hence, it is necessary that things should be present which are capable of being moved according to each motion. And without the definition of motion, everyone must acknowledge it to be necessary that what is able to be moved should be moved according to each motion, as for instance, that what is capable of being changed in quality should be changed in quality, and that what can be locally changed should be borne along. Hence, it is necessary that what is capable of being burnt should be prior to that which is burnt, and that which has the power of burning to that which burns. So with each relative type of motion, there is a capacity or potentiality for that motion, and those potentialities subsist in different sorts of substances. So footnote 9. Aristotle, beginning to demonstrate the perpetuity of motion through many arguments, produces the first from the definition of motion, which he says he had before given in his Physics, calling the first 5 books of this work Physics, which also he frequently denominates concerning principles. In the 3rd book, therefore, he gives the definition of motion, which he now mentions, that it is the energy of that which is movable so far as it is movable, viz., that which is moved remaining in capacity so long as it is moved, for when it perfectly abandons a subsistence in capacity and becomes in energy according to that which with respect to which it is said to be in capacity, it is no longer moved, but stands still in energy. So motion involves a transition between capacity and activity. If it was pure activity, it would be consummated, and it wouldn't be motion. Instead, it is that which is movable so far as it is, or the energy of that which is movable so far as it is movable. A mere activity or a mere capacity of motion isn't motion. Instead, it's the energy of that which has the capacity of motion insofar as it is movable, insofar as it has that potential. So you need the mixture, basically, of the activity and the potential to have motion. It is no longer moved, but stands still in energy. But it is always moved so far as it has something in capacity, which precedes to a subsistence in energy. From this conception of motion, Aristotle demonstrates that motion is perpetual, not only that which is properly so called, but also the mutation under which generation and corruption subsist. It must here, however, be observed that it is true only of changeable motion, that what is naturally adapted to be moved should necessarily subsist prior to motion, whether it is passively or actively moved. Okay, so changeable motion, the potential has to precede the capacity, but with perpetual motions, like the heavenly bodies, which have always existed, their potentiality and their actuality is sort of contemporaneous. They always have the continued potential to keep moving, but it's not that there was a time in which it was a pure potential for motion and then proceeded into energy. I think that's the point there. Back up to Aristotle. It is necessary, therefore, either that these should have been once generated, these potentials, there being a time when they were not, or that they should be perpetual. If, however, and I'm not sure if he's talking about the potentials of all of these various substances for motion, or if he's talking about all the various motions, actually, that these should not have been once generated. So either, well, I guess we'll see. Either the capacities for motion in these various substances or these various types of motions were either generated or are perpetual. If, however, each of those things which can move and be moved is generated, it is necessary that another mutation and motion should be generated prior to the mutation which is assumed, according to which that is generated, which is able to be moved or to move. Okay, so if the things which are movable came into being, then there's another motion prior to theirs, which we have to consider. But if they always had a prior subsistence, motion not existing, an absurdity will immediately appear to the intelligent. And to those who proceed still further, this will be found to happen by a yet greater necessity. For if, since some things are movable and others motive, there is at any time something which first moves and something which is first moved, and if at another time there is nothing which moves, but it is at rest, it is necessary that this should have been previously changed, for there was some cause of its rest, since rest is a privation of motion, so that there will be a mutation prior to the first mutation. For some things move according to one motion, but others according to contrary motions. So this, again, I think we dealt with this in the Plotinus group just now. Plato in the Phaedo says, contraries come from contraries. So like death comes from life. Therefore, where does life come from? Probably death, right? So here we have rest. Obviously, motion comes from rest. That's what we're getting at. But then rest comes from motion. So if we want to say that movable things existed in an unmoved state first, well then why are they in a state of rest in the first place? Because rest is inherently not just total immobility, but rest is a contrary of motion, so only makes sense as a cessation of motion. So the mutation which accounts for the rest is prior, and now we no longer have the first motion being of movable bodies from a state of rest. Instead, we have to have a previous motion which accounts for that rest in the first place. Thus, fire heats indeed, but does not refrigerate. But science appears to be one of things contrary. Let's see. Thus, fire heats indeed, but does not refrigerate, so it only does the one thing. But science appears to be one of things contrary. Hence, there also something similar appears. For the cold heats... Let me mute for a second. Excuse me. Hence, there also something similar appears, for the cold heats being turned in a certain respect, and having departed. So the absence of cold brings heat, he's saying. So in a certain respect, the absence of cold heats. Just as he who possesses scientific knowledge willingly errs when he improperly uses science. I think this is a little badly phrased. Such things, however, as are able to act and suffer, or to move and to be moved, are not entirely able to effect this, but then only when they subsist in this manner and are near to each other. So when they have the capacity for both, they don't always affect one or the other. It depends on the context, how they'll energize. Hence, when they approach near, the one moves and the other is moved, and when they are so circumstanced that the one is motive and the other movable. If, therefore, it was not always moved, it is evident that they were not so affected as that the one could be moved and the other could move. But it was necessary that one of them should be changed, for it is necessary that this should happen in things which have a relative subsistence. Thus, if a thing not having been doubled is now double, if not both, at least one of them must have been changed. There will therefore be a certain mutation prior to the first. And I bet Simplicius will be helpful here. Yeah. Aristotle, having shown that though the mover and the thing moved should be supposed to be generable, and though they should be supposed to be perpetual, if to move and to be moved are assumed from a beginning of time, it is necessary prior to the supposed beginning of motion that another motion should be assumed, so that there will always be a mutation prior to that which appears to be the first. Hence, motion is demonstrated to be perpetual from not being able to assume a first motion. Having especially shown these things from that which is moved, he afterwards shows the same thing from that which moves. For that which is motive incapacity of anything, if it is also about to move in energy, must necessarily itself first change the movable subject subsisting unchanged. I think he's saying that if something is like motive or has the power of moving something else in capacity, before it actually moves, it has to be moved. That motion has to be caused, in other words. So before that motion in energy from capacity is brought about, there has to be some activity that affects it. Proclus will say the same thing about action and potential. Whenever something is brought into activity from capacity, it is brought into activity by something active. It's like capacities don't explain their own energizing. Instead, when something moves from capacity to energy, it is because of some energy which brings it about. And so the moving subject, when it changes from capacity to energy in terms of motion, that first motion isn't the first, but that which brought it from capacity to energy is the first real mutation or motion. And this indeed is immediately manifest. But he also demonstrates this according to another method, for previously assuming in capacity that things which move with contrary motions, according to nature, the things moved remaining the same, must necessarily move with contrary motions, themselves being changed. Afterwards, he assumes from division that of things motive, some move with one simple motion, as fire heats and snow refrigerates, but others move with contrary motions, as science moves the soul both to truth and falsehood, when he who possesses scientific knowledge willingly errs. Aristotle also observes, so I'm not totally sure why he brings that in. I guess if one thing has a capacity to do two different activities, there has to be an explanation of why it's doing the one or the other, I think. That's what I went with before. So Aristotle also observes that things which appear to move in one way only produce contrary dispositions. So even the things which only do one thing, by their negation, produce the opposite, as that which is cold heats, according to accident, by departing. Thus also, that which moves according to place rests by departing, that is, by becoming disposed in a different way. So that all motive natures are not always able to move, nor are always able to be at rest. But they are then able when, if it should so happen, they approach near to moving and depart from being at rest. Hence, when they are so circumstanced, when they are so circumstanced that the one does not move and the other is not moved, but afterwards the one moves and the other is moved, a mutation is evidently produced, either about both or about one of them. For all relatives thus pass from a subsistence in capacity to a subsistence in energy, either one or both of them being changed. But that which moves and that which is moved are relatives. Hence, again, concluding the argument, he very properly adds, there will be, therefore, a certain mutation prior to the first. And again, the same questions must be asked concerning this mutation, which is produced by that which moves, in order that it may not be able to move in energy. For why again does it now move with that motion and not before? So a first motion of movable things is not good enough, because motion is between contraries, first of all, and rest is a contrary of motion and requires explanation just as much as the motion does. And to explain that rest, which is a temporal condition, you'll have to invoke some mutation by which it came to be that way. And there's another argument in there, but we'll just go back to Aristotle. There will be, therefore, a certain mutation prior to the first, to which may be added, however, how, to which may be added, how will there be prior and posterior time not having a subsistence, or how will there be time motion not existing? The definition of time was the number of motion, more or less. So if motion doesn't exist, Aristotle says time doesn't exist. But if time is the number of motion, or a certain motion, if time always is, it is necessary that motion also should be perpetual. Concerning time, however, all philosophers except one appear to accord, for they say it is unbegotten. On this account, Democritus shows that it is impossible for all things to have been generated, because time is unbegotten. But Plato alone generates time, for he says that it was generated together with the universe and that the universe is generated. Of course, that's a controversial reading. We'll see what Simplicius says to clarify that. This is, in keeping with Aristotle's general MO, a kind of reading of the face value symbols rather than the hidden meaning in Plato. He does this very often. So he'll address like the metaphor, or like he'll criticize the Pythagoreans for saying the soul is number, but number has these properties and the soul doesn't, so that's absurd. It's like, well, it's not a number in exactly the same sense that 3 is a number, you know. So this is just how Aristotle treats certain thinkers, and you can argue that this is to seemingly distance himself from Plato, or it was really just that Aristotle could not understand metaphor. All right, so footnote 2, Democritus says it's impossible for all things to be generated because time is unbegotten. And Simplicius, all the philosophers say, says Aristotle, except Plato, conceived time to be perpetual, for he says that it was generated together with the world. We shall shortly, however, learn how this is asserted by Plato. Right, so Aristotle's characterization of Plato is false. But Democritus believed time to be perpetual because, wishing to show that not all things are generated, he employed for this purpose as a thing evident that time is not begotten. Anaxagoras also, when he says all things were together, indicates that there was time prior to the fabrication of the world, for the verb were is temporal. He likewise says that things being indistinct in an infinite past time, they were afterwards separated and adorned by intellect. Empedocles also, when he says that there is perpetually an alternate dominion at one time of friendship and at another of strife, evidently conceives time to be perpetual. But if time, motion also is perpetual. Okay, that's all well and good. And then the bit about Plato, footnote 3. That which is generated and that which is without generation, being multifariously predicated, Plato using them in one way, and Aristotle in another, they appear to oppose, though in reality they do not dissent from each other. Right. So there are multiple senses of generation. For Aristotle, generation is always, strictly speaking, things that come into being and depart from being. But Plato calls things of the realm of generation even when they're perpetual, because their parts, or at least their motions, come and go. So they're like the generated world. They're in the generated world, even if they themselves are not generated. So time, being of the generated world, it has like generated characteristics without actually being generated in the strict sense. Though in reality they do not dissent from each other, for that is said to be generated which formerly was not, and afterwards is, and which has its subsistence in a part of time. According to which signification Aristotle uses the term generated, so in that strict sense, dividing it in opposition to that which is perpetual. But there is another signification of that which is generated, according to which it is divided in opposition to true being. For having its being in becoming to be, it subsists from another cause and not from itself. So the cosmos is perpetual, so not generated in Aristotle's sense, but it's not intelligible. It's of the world of generation in that sense. It subsists in becoming to be and has its being from another, not like the forms, in themselves and from themselves. Hence, through both these, viz., through its opposition to true being, the whole of which subsists at once, and to that which is self-subsistent, it is said to be generated. Though it should be perpetual, and according to this signification, Plato calls every sensible and corporeal nature generated. For everything corporeal, being divulsed, is neither able to give subsistence to itself, nor to be at once collected whole, neither according to essence, nor according to the being of essence. And it is evident that he immediately opposes that which is generated to being, when he says in the Timaeus, we must inquire what that is which is always being, but is without generation, and what that is which is generated indeed, but is never being. We read that quote yesterday in the Timaeus. Doesn't it seem like, Karnak, I assume you're still in here, doesn't it seem like it's unusually common that we like run into the same exact concepts in the Aristotle and Plato groups?
Yeah, it's Providence.
I guess. Like, I've never planned that, but it's like it always happens. According to this signification of that which is generated, and not according to that used by Aristotle, Plato says that the world and time are generated. Hence, inquiring concerning the world, whether it always was, having no beginning of generation, or whether it was generated, originating from a certain beginning, he replies, it was generated, for it is visible and tangible, and has a body. But all such things are sensible, and sensibles, being apprehended by opinion in conjunction with sense, appear to be generated and generable. Here we may see that Plato, assigning the cause of the world being generated, does not say that not having an existence before, it afterwards was, but that it is visible and tangible, and has a body. He was also of opinion that time was generated, for he says that it was generated together with the universe. Nor does he assign as the cause of this, time not existing before, but afterwards. For he says that it is perpetual, though not in such a manner as eternity, but because it is the image of eternity and subsists according to motion. Plato, therefore, in the Timaeus, after the animation of a corporeal nature, says, as soon as the generating Father understood that this generated image of the perpetual gods moved and lived, he was delighted, and in consequence of this delight, considered how he might fabricate it still more similar to its paradigm. Hence, as that is an eternal animal, he endeavored to render the universe such to the utmost of his ability. The nature, indeed, of the animal, its paradigm, is eternal. In this, it is impossible to adapt perfectly to a generated effect. Hence, he determined by a dianoetic energy to produce a certain movable image of eternity. And thus, while he was adorning and distributing the universe, he at the same time formed an eternal image flowing according to number of eternity abiding in one, which receives from us the appellation of time. Here we may observe that the demiurge, being willing that the universe, which is itself an image, should be as much as possible perpetual, imparted to it time, the image of eternity, in order, as he says, that the world might be as much as possible similar to its paradigm. For its paradigm, says he, is through all eternity being, but the world through the whole of time was and is and will be. If, therefore, the world was and is and will be, through the whole of time, it is evidently perpetual, not indeed in the same manner as eternity, for the eternal has the whole of its essence, power, and energy subsisting at once, because eternity possesses the ever in profound union with being. But time and that which is temporal, having their being in becoming to be, evolve the all-perfect nature of eternity and the eternal according to motion and generation. If, therefore, Plato says that the universe participates of perpetuity as much as possible through time, it is evident that time, according to him, is perpetual, though not in the same manner as eternity. Let no one, therefore, looking at the words, fancy these philosophers oppose each other. For if, indeed, adopting the same significations of that which is generated and that which is without generation, the one said that time and the world are generated, but the other that they are without generation, they would speak contrary to each other. But now they accord in their conceptions. It's a semantic difference. For if Aristotle calls time the number of motion, but Plato an eternal image proceeding according to number, what difference will there be in these conceptions, since they even agree in the appellations which they employ? If also Aristotle says that time is perpetual, but Plato that the world becomes perpetual through the participation of time, and if Plato clearly says that the world is generated as being corporeal, but time as having its being in motion and becoming to be, both which Aristotle also acknowledges, how can we any longer think that what is generated according to Plato contradicts that which is without generation according to Aristotle in conceptions, and not in words only? Why then, it may be said, does Aristotle say that all philosophers except Plato assert time to be without generation? We reply, because Plato alone says that time was generated, and adds the cause of its being generated, for it was generated together with the universe. But why does he also say that the universe was generated? Because it was usual with the ancients to contradict that which is apparent through a contempt of the knowledge of the mere superficial. Since, therefore, the term generated is more usually asserted of things which formerly were not, and afterwards are, on this account Aristotle, contradicting this signification of the word, appears indeed to correct Plato, who calls time generated, but in reality does not correct Plato, but those who adapt this signification of the word generated to time and the world. Simplicius doesn't really psychologize Aristotle and address whether this was intentional on Aristotle's part. As in, did Aristotle understand that he was in agreement with Plato? Simplicius kind of leaves that unexamined. And we'll go ahead and wrap up now. We'll start here, page 181. Hopefully this highlight remains. Can I? No. There must be a way to leave a more permanent highlight mark. Okay, there we go. I've put this red line through these words. That's where we'll start next time. Any comments on today's reading? I could look at there was someone chatting in the live chat. Alpha is the omega, and Anaxagoras had some vivid imagination. Fully related states. The polarity of opposites being the absolute is a recurring theme. Yeah. Well, the idea there is that the polarity of opposites is perpetual or eternal, not that it just is the absolute itself. Motion is any dynamic change, not just physical. Usually for motion, people think Newtonian motion. Right. Okay, so some good comments there. One last time, any comments in the Jitsi?
Just fun speculation, but because of the culture of all the philosophers trying to one-up each other, probably Aristotle thought he was correcting Plato, and Simplicius had to reconcile it. But who knows?
Yeah. I mean, that's consistent with my Aristotle was just autistic theory, and autistic people have a hard time with metaphors, so maybe that's all it is. And genuinely did believe he was correcting Plato. So you have a few theories. So one is Aristotle's just autistic, and that's why he misconstrues Plato so many times. 2 is they were secretly in agreement and decided, like Plato and Aristotle cooperated, to have this dialectic where like Plato is looking to the forms, Aristotle's looking to sensibles, and so that way they cover all bases sort of and specialize in two distinct institutions. So it was a Plato-Aristotle conspiracy that made Aristotle write that way, or Aristotle was an agent of the Macedonians and understood the truth behind Plato's philosophy, but intentionally tried to refute it through sophistical means. And you know, we've read sophistical refutations, we've read the Organon. Aristotle clearly would understand the different possible senses of terms. He talks about like homonymy being a source of all these sophistical devices, and then as Simplicius demonstrates, is using the homonymy here to seemingly refute Plato when he's not. So it's like, it's almost like that's the most likely option to me, that Aristotle attacked Plato because he had to undermine like autonomous Athenian philosophy and create something, you know, like empire approved or something like that. I don't know. And then there's also different layers in Aristotle's text where sometimes he seems very favorable towards Platonic ideas and then sometimes very critical. So did he like, was he just, oh, yeah, there's the fourth theory, I guess, that he was basically a Platonist, didn't get selected as head, left the academy, was upset about it, and then went back and edited all his writings and used like dirty tricks to, you know, assassinate Plato's philosophy as much as possible. I don't know if we'll ever know, but that's the Aristotle mystery. We'll keep on investigating it. But all right, thanks everyone for participating today. Have a good week. Take care.
Thanks. Take care.